All right, so yesterday I hit a bench press PR, 157.5 kilos or 347 pounds, I believe. So naturally, today I'm making a video on how you can improve your own bench press. Just some tips and tricks that I've picked up over the past few years. The bench press wasn't a lift that really came naturally to me. The first time I ever benched, I think I was 16 years old, about 60 kilos body weight, if that, and I actually failed the empty bar for one rep. So as you can imagine, it's been quite a long process to get to where I am now. I've definitely got loads more room to grow. My bench press is not strong by any means, but I just wanted to kind of share some things that I've learned over the years that might help you out with your own bench press strength. So in the video today, I've got some notes just here in front of me. I'm going to break down bench press strength in 5 main sections. So number 1, we're going to have bench technique. Number 2, bench programming. Then accessory lifts, number 3. Number 4 will be equipment, so things like belt, wrist wraps, and then finally externals, so body weight, just things generally outside of the gym. So I'll go through each of those 5 points, and hopefully by the end you can take something that helps you improve your own bench. So first things first, and this is something that I've changed quite significantly in the past year or two, is bench press technique. And I'll overlay some clips on screen here as well, just so you can see a few different examples of bench press technique. But I would say generally when it comes to powerlifting, the bench press setup is kind of split into one of 2 main categories. So you've got the classic like Sean Noriega style bench where you've got the feet really close to the foot of the bench. You've got quite a big arch, a wide grip, all those different kind of things. Then the opposite of that, and this is kind of my bench style, is the feet wider, further back, less of an arch typically, and we're using kind of more of a sinking and throwing style versus the soft touch that you usually see with this kind of feet forward, high arch type setup. Now, straight away, I wouldn't say there is one kind of better or worse technique out of those 2. There are many bench pressers who are far stronger than me who use a soft touch, a close foot position, and they're doing just fine. There are also tons of strong benchers who use this wide foot position with the sinking style. First ones that come to mind is like Julius Maddox. You've got Jesus Olivares. I think that's how you say his surname. Dawson Windham as well. He benches like in the 500 range quite easily. So yeah, it really just depends on the individual. Now, I've messed around with both stances, and I've had my athletes mess around with both stances. The one that I've settled on personally is definitely the wider foot position, with less of an arch and a sinking style. Let me kind of talk through the kind of pros and cons of this setup. I'll focus on this style of bench simply because it's the one that I personally use and coach. So let's get into it a little bit deeper. So if I run you through my entire bench setup, so typically I'll lie down flat on the bench, I'll grab onto the bar, and I will pull myself off the head of the bench. And I'm kind of wedging the pad of the bench underneath my shoulder blades. That's where it kind of sits. I'll take my grip on the bar, which for me personally is pinkies on the power rings. Now that is quite a close grip, particularly with me having fairly long arms, but it just works for me. It feels strong, shoulders feel good, I don't pick up any aches or pains, so it's something that I've just stuck with over the years. And just as an aside, there are very strong benchers who use both narrow and wide grip widths for the bench press. So don't get kind of married to one particular style that you have to bench with a wide grip, because it doesn't always work out that way in practice. So yeah, I'll take my grip on the bar. I then pull myself forwards whilst spreading my feet as wide as I possibly can. So I spread those feet as wide as possible. I'm thinking about getting the feet as far back underneath me as I can, while still keeping my heels down on the floor. And once I've got that really tight foot position, I will swing myself forwards into an arch. I don't have much of an arch, but as much of one as I can kind of manage. So yeah, pull myself into that arch, thinking about digging my traps down into the bench as I do so. And And yeah, once I've got that really tight, uncomfortable position, and just to mention, it will feel uncomfortable, especially if this is your first time kind of messing around with a wider foot position. Yeah, so once I'm in this position, feet as wide as possible, as much of an arch as I can manage. I'm really driving the knees out as much as I can. Then I will take my grip on the bar. I'm using a Bulldog Grip. So essentially the easiest way to explain a Bulldog Grip, most people will grip the bar like this, just generally just making a fist like this, a normal standard grip. And this grip is okay, it's fine, but sometimes you will see a bit of excessive wrist extension, or the wrist will kind of twist and twitch on the chest, which obviously when you're trying to press a maximal weight, you don't want the wrist moving around a ton. And that obviously subsequently impacts elbow positioning as well. So to take the Bulldog Grip, instead of just this normal squeeze fist kind of grip, all we're going to do is internally rotate the hand a little bit, and you're going to try and place the bar a little bit lower in the hand, down here, kind of near this meaty part in your palm, as opposed to being high near the calluses. So a regular normal grip would position the bar here, and you would be fully squeezing the bar. A Bulldog Grip would place the bar further down here, internally rotating the hand a little bit, and then you're going to kind of pinch the bar as opposed to grasping it. The reason we do that is just it's a little bit more efficient. It gets the bar closer to the wrist joint, so you reduce that moment arm there, so you're not wasting any force transfer into the bar. And it results in the bar sitting directly over the weight-bearing bones in the arm. Yeah, so I take that Bulldog Grip, and as soon as I've got my grip secured on the bar, I then flare my elbows out to get them under the bar to unrack. Once I've got the bar unracked, as opposed to that soft touch kind of style where you're lowering under control, you're really controlled, really tight, that nice soft touch at the bottom, mine is kind of the opposite. So I still want to maintain control over the bar, but I am dropping it quite aggressively, and I am cueing myself to take the bar down hard. And the best way I can kind of explain it for this sinking style of bench, let me try and demonstrate a little bit. So we've got the bar out of the rack. As I bring it down quite hard, my thoracic spine, or my upper back, relaxes like this. So my arch will relax slightly, and my upper back will kind of move forward. You can see like this, goes from extension to flexion. So I'm trying to time that with the bar, that this happens, and then I re-extend my spine when I press, just like this. And for me, and I see this in other kind of users of this sink style bench, you can generate a lot of speed off the chest using that technique, and it allows you to kind of overcome that typical sticking point you get a few inches off the chest. So yeah, taking the bar down hard, and then I'm thinking about kind of collapsing my arch and then re-extending to press. For me, it's been really, really helpful. I would never go back to a soft touch style bench. And if I kind of overlay on screen that recent PR that I hit the other day, this 157, you will actually see the speed that the bar moves off my chest for those first few inches, and that's because I was able to effectively use this sink style and really use my legs to kind of propel the bar off my chest and get it moving very quickly. And then usually because of that, I'm able to really grind at lockout. Yeah, so this isn't to say that like a soft touch isn't good. Loads of people way stronger than me use that technique and they do just fine. I just personally really like this sink style. It's added weight to my bench. I genuinely think I get probably a good 5 to 10 kilos out of this style purely by using my legs. So yeah, that's kind of my overview, just basic, of my bench press setup. If we talk a little bit more about the specifics, so kind of grip width, actual grip on the bar, I'll just basically start from the top down and run through a few of the basics. So if we start with the actual setup, which I've just gone through, creating an arch, that kind of thing. So the arch, I do think some lifters focus a little bit too much on maximizing their arch and sacrifice overall positioning just to try and cut the range of motion down as much as possible. And whilst it is obviously beneficial for range of motion to be shortened because it means you have to do less work and ideally you can then press a little bit more weight, I think some lifters would be better off just getting stronger rather than relying on their arch, because you will see it quite often with these very technical lifters. If I again use like someone like Sean Noriega as an example, who's a very technical, very good bencher, But you will see in some of his competitions, if the judges are harsh or if his strength isn't where it needs to be on a particular day, he will fail a lift on a technicality because he's so reliant on his positioning. And that's not to say that's a bad thing at all. He's obviously a great bencher. Just for myself personally, I find this sink style a little bit more reliable because it's less dependent on that positioning and that arch. All I need to do is sink the bar into my body, and then I'm good to go pretty much. Like, you could argue that the timing of that sink and press is important, but once you've practiced it for a while, it is quite difficult to mess it up. So yeah, this method is just a little bit more repeatable for me personally. Maybe I'm just not very good at that kind of high arch, soft touch style bench. I'm not very practiced at it. That might be the reason why I'm not as good at it. But yeah, like I said, neither soft touch versus sink, high arch versus lower arch is better or worse. It just depends on the individual. In terms of the rest of the setup, so if we talk about grip width and actual grip on the bar, so we already went over the actual grip in the hand, kind of this normal full grip versus a Bulldog grip. My preference in general is the Bulldog grip. It feels strongest, it feels best on my wrists. The bar just feels more secure in my hand. But if you are benching with a full grip like this and you're not having any problems, then carry on, it's completely fine. Grip width is something that we can kind of nail down a little bit more specifically. So in general, when we're choosing grip width, my kind of default recommendation is to have the joints stacked at the bottom of the lift. So we would ideally want the wrist to be stacked over the elbow, and we'd see a nice kind of straight line here with your joints. A grip that produced a forearm angle like this would be too wide, and a grip that produced an angle like this would be a little bit too close. Now obviously there's individual variation there, but I would start with the grip that produces a vertical forearm, and then you can kind of mess around with it from there based on what feels strongest. So start with the grip that produces vertical forearm, and then I would probably experiment with wide grip benches, close grip benches, and you can see just what feels best for you. So we've covered the setup, the grip width, grip. I think the only other thing to really go over, because we've discussed kind of soft touch versus sink as well. I can go into that a little bit more in a second. The only other thing would be the touch point, so where the bar actually touches on your body. So in general, the wider your grip, the higher the touch point will be, and the closer the grip, the lower the touch point will be. And that is just because to maintain stacked joints, with a wider grip you'll need to flare more, and with a closer grip you'll need to tuck more. Again, it will just depend on grip width. It will also depend on the height of your arch as well, because in general we want to touch the highest point of our arch to reduce that range of motion. So bigger arch will usually be a slightly higher touch point, and a smaller arch will generally be a lower touch point. Actually, that reminds me, one more thing we can go into is bar path, and this is obviously very important. So this will be the final thing I go over in terms of technique. So bar path in the bench press, typically people think it needs to be this straight vertical line just up and down, which is in most cases not the most efficient bar path, and I'll explain why. So when we look at, and we do have it's only one study I believe on this, but you can also go and observe it yourself at a powerlifting competition if you watch elite level benchers. Novice benchers, they will typically use this kind of straight up and down bar path, so the bar will literally move in quite a straight line. Whereas elite bench pressers, their bar path will go back and then up in this kind of like J curve or reverse J curve pattern. The reason why elite bench pressers use that kind of bar path is because it's far more efficient, especially for the front delts. And kind of the best way I can explain that, if you think at the top of the bench press, right, you're holding the bar here, locked over your shoulder joint. It's directly over the shoulder joint. So when we lower the bar, we typically lower it around the sternum, upper abs, which obviously is a few inches lower than your shoulders in relation to your feet, so forward. So because of that, to get the bar back over the shoulders and for your joints to be stacked and to reduce the force the front delt has to produce, you need to press the bar back and then straight up. Otherwise, the front delts are having to do way more work to complete the lift. So that obviously necessitates this J-curve bar path. Yeah, so just cue yourself to press back and then up. You can also think about kind of winding and unwinding the elbows as you press. So slightly tucking the elbows on the descent, slightly flaring them on the way back up. David Wilson, I believe that's how you say his name, has some great videos on this. I'll link those in the description. But yeah, essentially we want that J-curve bar path to improve efficiency, reduces range of motion a little bit because it allows you to touch the highest point of your arch, and it reduces the force that the work that the front delts have to do to complete the lift. So yeah, that's kind of the basics, the key kind of things. So for me personally, I like a sinking style pulls. I like the feet as wide and far back as possible, thinking about driving the knees out, really collapsing the arch a little bit at the bottom, and then re-extending to press. If that doesn't suit you, try a soft touch style. That works completely fine as well, but this is just what's kind of worked for me. So yeah, that's section 1 done. Technique, that's going to be kind of the longest section, obviously, because there's a bit more detail to be included there and it's quite important. So we'll move on to section 2. This one's going to be a little bit more brief. This is going to be on bench press programming and just some things that I've personally learned with myself and my athletes to produce kind of the best bench press strength over time. So first thing when it comes to programming that I've observed is frequency is very important for the bench press. So I have not personally coached or really observed any huge bench pressers who bench 1 to 2 times a week. Obviously there will be outliers there, but in general, most very strong bench pressers that I've seen bench press frequently, so I mean 3 to 4 times a week. I've even seen some lifters as high as like 5-6 times a week. But generally I would say kind of 2, 3 or 4 times a week is going to be the sweet spot. So 2 to 4 times a week. It doesn't mean every session needs to be heavy, definitely not. I would have some of those sessions heavier, some lighter, and some very light for technique practice. So yeah, 2 to 4 times a week is what I would recommend. Start on the lower end and then gradually kind of build that up over time as you need to. I would recommend that you have kind of one primary or heavier bench day. That's where you get some more of your skill practice. So you might do heavy triples, doubles, or singles. Then I would have 1 or 2 kind of moderate bench exposures. So it could be a comp bench again, it could be a long pulls bench, it could be a tempo, something like that, or a varied grip width. And that could still be for like triples, doubles, or 4s, 5s, still a moderately heavy weight. And then for that 4th exposure, I would have something that is much lighter. So you might have a feet up bench, a Larsen press, a tempo, just something that's light just to kind of get some volume in, keep the stimulus going in between the heavier lifts. Yeah. Also, kind of in addition to those bench press specific movements, you can add in obviously isolation or bodybuilding work for the prime movers. So lots of work for the chest, for the delts, for the triceps. I often include kind of one horizontal press, like a dumbbell press, a chest press, and then one vertical press, like a shoulder press machine or a dumbbell shoulder press. And then I'll typically put in some kind of like lateral raise for the delts and like a tricep push down or skull crusher, overhead extension or something like that. I will say the bodybuilding stuff is important because obviously you need to get bigger if you want to build a bigger bench. I would just say be cautious that you don't overdo it to the point where you detract from your bench press performance. So I would first start with 2 to 4 times a week bench pressing, adding kind of a minimal effective dose of bodybuilding. So maybe 1 chest press, 1 shoulder press, 1 tricep movement, leave it there and then add more as needed if you tolerate it quite well. And that should do you good, I think, rather than starting on the high end and then you kind of run out of room to add more volume, more exercises, if that makes sense. In terms of bench press volume and intensity, in my experience, volume, you can go pretty high. I usually limit things to around kind of 2 to 5 sets of bench press per session. I find anything lower than 2 sets stimulus probably isn't really enough to be worth it. Anything higher than 5 sets, and generally the quality just starts to fall apart. The fatigue gets too high. So in general, I would say probably like 2 to 4 sets is probably a sweet spot. Again, start on the low end, kind of titrate it up over time as needed. This is very individual as well. So obviously one person might need, I don't know, 15, 20 sets of bench press a week. Another person might only need 10. So you're going to need to start at the low end and kind of experiment and kind of assess your response. Finally, for programming, intensity. So in general, I find the bench press tends to respond a little better to higher average intensities when compared to like the squat and the deadlift. So typically I'm adding in a top set of 1 to 5 reps in that kind of RPE 6 to 8-ish range for the bulk of the training block, starting at lower intensities and then gradually working it up through a block. In terms of the back off work, I'm typically programming that in like the 70 to 80% range, I would say, with a little bit below and a little bit above. But yeah, that seems to be the sweet spot, kind of that 70 to 80% range. Maybe even venturing a little bit higher once you get closer to competition, peaking and that kind of thing. Bench seems to do fairly well for me anyway, and a few of my athletes with quite frequent heavy top sets. So singles a little bit more often, doubles a bit more often. I usually keep bench press singles in most of the year in general, just because they're quite easy to recover from. But yeah, that's kind of an overview, very broad overview of programming for the bench press. I would say 2 to 4 times a week, add in bodybuilding for the prime movers where needed, and I would stick to kind of like cables, machines, and dumbbells for that. Start at the low end, increase it gradually over time as needed. And then assess based on individual response. So next, moving on to section 3, which is accessories. Now, this I kind of covered a little bit in the programming section, but I want to go into kind of the use of specific bench press accessories, so things like pin bench, long pulls bench, tempo, and then the bodybuilding side of things as well, and just kind of explain why you might want to choose particular movements over another, the purpose of them, and that kind of thing. So first off, why would you even use bench press accessories or variations? Why wouldn't you just do comp bench 4 times a week, for example? You could do that, and I've had athletes bench at higher specificities like that with little to no variation. But I think there are a lot of benefits to using variation in your programming, not just for the bench, but in general. So first of all, it's good for fatigue management. So using something like a tempo bench, a long pulls bench, varied grip, inevitably it just strips some weight off the bar, and as a result reduces fatigue because the weight is lighter, the stimulus generated is less. So fatigue management. It's also good for just improving your general kind of motor skills and your ability to learn different movements and patterns. So if you always stick to the same technique over and over again, you can kind of blunt your ability to learn new motor patterns. So adding variety in there, like different grip widths, different bar positions, different tempos, different ranges of motion, it just builds up this kind of big base of skill that you can draw from, and allow you to experiment with different things. So you might do a wide grip bench for a block and find out actually a wide grip bench is stronger than your comp grip bench and end up switching, and vice versa. And I've had that happen to many of my athletes before, where I give them a wide grip bench for one mesocycle, and they're PRing it by like week 2, week 3, and we end up switching. So we got fatigue management, we've got just general motor learning or technique development. We've also got just the psychological aspect of it. It's fun to go in and do some variations and not kind of hammer the same lift over and over again. Also on that note as well, it can reduce the likelihood of overuse injuries because you're kind of shifting the stimulus to different structures, different muscles slightly. So that can be definitely helpful as well. So in terms of which accessories to use, how many, when to use them, again, this is very individual, but in general, if you're benching, let's say 3 or 4 times a week, I would typically have 1 or 2 of those be a just standard competition grip bench, and I would have 1 or 2 of them be some kind of variation. So one of them could be like a load limiting variation. So like a Larson press, a tempo bench, a long pause, for example. And I would probably have the other slot be something that is technique focused. So you're using it to kind of hone in and develop on a certain aspect of technique. So using me for an example with this kind of sinking style bench, I always include a long pause bench in my programming. So typically like a 3-count pause. And the reason for that is it really lets me kind of practice that sink style. So I've got a few seconds to sit there on the chest to kind of time that sink and throw, and it really helps me. So for someone who does a soft touch bench and you want them to be really controlled on the chest, you might use something like a Spoto bench or a tempo bench, for example. So yeah, just keep that in mind when you're choosing your accessories. Like, you need to identify a reason for actually using it, and then add it into the program, assess the response, and see if it's beneficial for you or not. But yeah, there needs to be a reason, but don't just go overboard and variation everything and just add it in for the sake of it. I don't think that's useful either. But yeah, they definitely have a purpose in intelligent programming, in my opinion. When it comes to kind of bodybuilding and accessories for hypertrophy purposes, I would generally stick to machines, cables, dumbbells, because you need to keep the kind of purpose of these movements in mind. So once you've done the skill practice with the heavier stuff, the machines, the accessories, the bodybuilding stuff, it's for hypertrophy, right? We're trying to grow muscle, we're trying to get as big as possible, we're trying to grow the prime movers of the bench press for a bigger bench. To do that, in my opinion, we want to choose low skill based movements that have a pretty good stimulus to fatigue ratio. So if we just compare doing like a 4x10 on the bench press versus a 4x10 on a chest press machine, the chest press machine, you just sit down, you bang out your 4 sets of 10, you don't really have to think about much, you just train hard, right? You do your feet up bench, you've got to think about going through your setup, getting your arch, taking your grip, bar path. Like, it's a much more fatiguing. And I'm not saying you can't build a huge chest doing bench press, you obviously can, but I think if you're powerlifting, do your skill practice for the most part on the bench, and then jump on a machine or use dumbbells or cables for the bodybuilding stuff. It's much easier to push close to failure and kind of save on a little bit of fatigue. So I would add in 1 chest press, 1 vertical press, and 1 kind of tricep movement at a minimum. And then from there you can experiment further. So like I said earlier, I like kind of flat dumbbell press with the feet up, incline dumbbell press, chest press machines, dumbbell shoulder press machine, and then for triceps, all of your standard stuff like tricep push downs, overhead extensions, and those kind of things. And then over time, as you get bigger and stronger, you can start to add in things like maybe lateral raises, chest flies. I don't really tend to program all that often, but there are use cases. So yeah, again, start at the low end and just kind of build up over time. But I would suggest training the bench press like a powerlifter, train the other stuff like a bodybuilder. High RPE, close to failure, decent amount of volume, and choose things that are just easy to go and stimulate the target muscle on. Okay, so final 2 sections. These ones are going to be quite quick. We're approaching 30 minutes, so these last 2 are probably going to take only a couple minutes each. So which section are we on? Number 4, which is equipment for the bench press. Lots of very strong people do not use equipment on the bench press. You'll see loads of strong lifters, they just jump on the bench, no wrist wraps, no belt, nothing, and they go and bench heavy weights. For myself personally, I use wrist wraps, I use a belt, and I actually bench in these deadlift slippers that I picked up recently. Let me show you. So I've got these, the Notorious Lift sumo slippers. I think it's like the Gen 2s. Now, for my style of bench with this wide foot position and using a lot of leg drive, these have been really, really helpful for me. So you can see, if I show you here, the sole, because of this thickness here and how kind of sticky this grip is, it really allows me to get my feet really wide, really far back underneath me without slipping. I know a lot of people use like the new Avancus, I believe they're called, or other different deadlift slippers and that kind of thing. But in general, I think for the basics, if you want to use equipment, about helps me quite a lot. I know people are kind of divided on that, but for me personally, it helps me increase pressure in my core. It helps me maintain my arch a little bit more. My back doesn't cramp as often, so I use about. Wrist wraps, I feel like help me a bunch because I'm using this Bulldog Grip and there is a bit of wrist extension. Because obviously the bar is sitting right here, my wrists do have to be a little extended. So using a wrist wrap kind of really casts my wrist in position, reduces any wrist pain that I get as well. So I just use the SBD, the long flexible ones. Tried the stiff, I really didn't like them. So yeah, I use SBD belt, SBD long flexible wrist wraps. These slippers, which I think have really improved my bench press. Again, they're the Gen 2 Sumo sole from Notorious Lift, I think. Yeah, but besides that, it's the only equipment I really use. Again, just play around with it, see what suits you. I know some people hate using a belt on the bench because they find it restricts their arch, but I don't have much of an arch anyway, so it helps me. And finally, if we look at externals, so things outside of the gym. So first and foremost, the thing that has helped me improve my bench press the most by far is gaining weight. So I'm currently going from the 93 class, transitioning up to the 105 class. I've gained about 3 to 4 kilos in the past 3 months. And just instantly, I've probably added between 5 to 7.5 kilos to my bench max. I hit that 157.5 kilos the other day. I think there was probably like 162.5 there on that day. And I'm hoping at competition in a week and a half, 2 weeks, I can put up at least 160. So would definitely recommend gaining weight. For obvious reasons, obviously you'll increase muscle size, your torso will just be a little bit thicker to press from, so again, reduce range of motion. Yeah, gaining weight and building muscle is never going to hurt your bench press for sure. Besides that, so in addition to the weight gain, obviously staying on top of recovery factors, so sleeping 7 to 8 hours a night, managing your life stress, hydrating properly, eating enough calories, obviously gaining weight, eating enough protein. So I would recommend at least like 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight, or 1 gram per pound of body weight, either way you want to put it. And also I think people really underestimate studying the bench press. Like, it's a skill, and if you're a powerlifter, this is our sport. Other athletes, they all study their sports, they watch the best performers in their sports. So I think we should too as well. So I've watched a lot of strong benchers, and that's where I kind of adapted my technique from, and that's what's helped me improve my bench press technique the most. So I'm always watching lifters, like Dawson Windham is one in particular that I'm always watching his setup and kind of replicating for myself. So yeah, don't underestimate studying the sport. So looking at different lifters with similar kind of leverages to you, what other strong powerlifters and coaches are doing, and go and experiment with that and try it for yourself. Don't just settle on a technique, stick with it forever, and then kind of never change or tweak things. So that is kind of the 5-section overview of things that have worked for me over the years, improving my bench press. It's allowed me to go from failing the empty bar probably 9-10 years ago now to almost pressing 160 kilos today. So we've got technique. Find a technique that works for you. My preference is the sinking style with a wide foot position, feet as wide and as far back as possible. But a soft touch with a high arch position is also fine, and loads of lifters do great with that as well. Programming, I would recommend you bench 2 to 4 times a week, kind of starting at the low end, increasing as necessary, adding in bodybuilding work to complement the bench press. Choose accessories specifically based on your individual needs and weak points, and that can apply to muscle groups as well. If you've got a lagging chest or shoulders, choose movements accordingly. In terms of equipment, really you can bench with no equipment, but I like using a belt, wrist wraps, and deadlift slippers just because they're quite grippy. And then for externals, gain weight, so I would recommend 0.5 kilo to 1 kilo per month, nice and slow weight gain. Make sure you're staying on top of recovery, so your sleep, stress, hydration, nutrition, those kind of things. and study your sport. So watch good benchers and see what you can learn from them. There's always things you can learn. So yeah, if you enjoyed or took anything from this video, hopefully you can take some tips that help you hit your next bench press PR. If you did find it useful, then leave me a comment down below or subscribe to the channel for future videos. I'm more than open to topics for future videos. I'm looking to try and upload once a week at the minute as well. If you want to see more of my content, I'm posting on Instagram every single day, Ben Evidence-Based Strength. I'll put some links on the screen somewhere here as well. But yeah, apart from that, I will catch you guys next time. Good luck on your bench press training.